Hey there, this is Steve Lee with Veritas Catholic Network. We have a special treat on Let Me Be Frank today. Paul Jarzembowski joins Bishop Frank Caggiano to talk about Ash Wednesday and about reaching young people and bringing them deeper into the life of the church. Before we begin, have you downloaded the Veritas Catholic Network app to your phone? The app allows you to listen to Veritas live, grab any of our podcasts, and more. So if you haven't done it already, go to the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, or visit www.veritascatholic.com to download the Veritas Catholic Network app and keep Catholic radio right at your fingertips. All right, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank, everybody. It is my great pleasure, as always, to introduce Bishop Frank Caggiano.
Steve, it's good to see you, and I'm delighted that Paul is joining us.
Yes, that's right. We have a special guest joining us today. Paul Jarzembowski heads up Youth and Young Adult Ministries at the USCCB as part of the Secretariat of Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth. Paul is the National Coordinator for the United States Investment in World Youth Day, and he oversaw the preparation and implementation of the USCCB engagement with the Synod on Young People in Rome a couple years ago. He also serves on a number of boards of directors and leadership teams for various organizations and initiatives, including the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry, the National Catholic Network de Pastoral Juvenil Hispania, the National Advisory Team on Young Adult Ministry, the National Catholic Committee on Scouting, and many more. His impressive resume also includes work with over 300 dioceses, parishes, college campuses, religious communities, webinars, and ministry conferences around the world, and he's currently developing his first book called Hope from the Ashes, which should be published in 2022. And Excellency, I know you and Paul have worked together at the UCCB.
I've known Paul one day less than forever. It's been forever we've been working together. And I am delighted that you are here. So I and our listeners can learn from your experience, which is, as Steve said, it's just so extensive. And quite frankly, I mean, I have learned a great deal from you from the many years we have worked together. So I'm delighted that you're here, Paul.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, it's great to have all these opportunities. Bishop Frank and I have known each other through our work with World Youth Day, through our work at the Bishops' Conference, and he gets to put up with me when we go out and do projects together. So it's a pleasure to be with you, Bishop.
Oh, thank you. And of course, this podcast is payback. So this is great. Oh, my friend. So now listen, I'm going to start with a basic question. We hear so much about young people and young adults, and we know that they're different. That's talking almost of apples and oranges, right? But let's focus in on young adults just for a second. How they are disaffiliated, that they're not involved in the life of the church, and we sense that it's a major issue. But talk to us about how big an issue that is, and what does it really mean when we say young adults are disaffiliated from the church? Why don't we start with that?
It's a great question. I like to go on numbers. I mean, there's a lot of anecdotes we can all tell. We all know maybe a nephew, a son or daughter, a friend who may not be active, but sometimes just going by some of the raw numbers will be helpful. The extent of it is even amongst people who self-identify as Catholic in their young adult years, so in their 20s or 30s, only about 15% of them normally come on a Sunday. Now, of course, the numbers are much different now within this pandemic, but on average, about 15% of those who self-identify as Catholic will be coming on a given Sunday. So that's 85% of people who claim Catholicism as their faith, and would say to a researcher, "Yeah, I'm Catholic," and 85% of them would say, "But I don't go every week." So that I think right there summarizes an extent to that disaffiliation, which I think we all know anecdotally, but those numbers really speak to that.
Right. So then these would be, for example, young people who may have gone to Catholic school or have gone to parishes of faith formation, have received perhaps their sacraments, but as they've grown older,
Correct.
have just decided to be active in the church, in a sense, in a unique way. right? In the image of what they think should be or what they would want to do. So it's not like the traditional every Sunday, but some may come once a month, some come every other
Right.
month, or may come in the holy days, or may come in like a day like Ash Wednesday. Is that a fair way of putting it?
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the monthly attendees is another fascinating phenomenon that they may say to someone, "I am religious about going. I go every month." So for them, that sense of regularity is perhaps a little different than perhaps we may be accustomed to.
Right.
Mhm.
And you and I have worked on this for a very long time, and in some of the reflections I've offered, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on this too. I've always kind of pointed to the fact that it isn't so much that young adults are not seeking a relationship with the Lord, but where they have difficulty is, despite the normal obstacles in having a relationship with the Lord, is that they don't necessarily see as much of a value in having an organized community be part of that search. Is that in a world where technology allows you to create your own communities, and the fact that we're an organized faith, we have organized parishes with people that are very, very different, and that practice the faith at times very vibrantly and other times perhaps less so. Question is, do I need that community to find my way to the Lord? Is that also a factor in what young adults kind of struggle with, you think?
Yeah, I in a sense, I don't think that there is as much a faith problem as much as there is a belonging issue, a belonging concern. People don't feel like they belong to any particular community or institution. In the United States, prayer and engagement and belief in God is incredibly high relative to the amount of participation in religious services, in belonging to parishes or other religious groups. So relatively speaking, I would say that young people especially are very spiritual. And I know it kind of sounds a little trite to say spiritual but not religious, but there's some truth to it. There is a deep sense of they feel a connection to the Lord. They just don't feel that connection often through a community and a religious community. And it's not just affecting Catholics either. This is something that many other religious groups are experiencing as well. So this is something that evangelicals and mainline Protestants, Greek Orthodox, that many of them are experiencing, and in much the same way we are.
Right. It weighs on my heart a tremendous amount. It always has, but even in recent months, even more so, because as we kind of plot a pastoral strategy to try to arise out of the pandemic with, please God, its grip lessons, then small faith communities, I think, are going to be an essential piece to the renewal of the church, where people may have fallen out of habit to come to Mass, even those who are not young adults. But young adults, to find a small community that supports them, I think is an important piece to any outreach, any pastoral outreach. Would you agree, or would you see it in a different way, Paul?
I think they want somebody to know. I think the key word you said there was support. They want to know that they're supported, that somebody's got their back. And I think that may be what they don't feel in institutional communities. That you go to a parish and you sit in the back, and if they come that once a month, do they feel they really belong there? Do they feel that anyone is supporting them? They may not, but there might be, as we come out of this pandemic, if they can find places where there is support, I think that's going to be, an element of it. And small communities are certainly one way of doing that. There's probably other ways as well. I think there are some that like that kind of small group kind of dynamic. There are others who prefer the large group or almost anonymous kind of belonging. There's people who, they're the type of people who would probably go to a stadium filled with baseball or football fans. That's not a small community, but they still feel a sense of belonging to a tribe of sorts that's almost anonymous. So I think it depends on the individual what they will probably cling to. But I think what's through it all is, again, that word you used, support. That they're supported, that they feel a sense of belonging.
It highlights one of the lessons I learned when we first started working together, it's a lesson actually you taught me, and that is there's no one way to do this, right? That when you talk about young adults, they all are not of the same mindset, of the same background, of the same preferences. So we have to look at it in almost like a prism, right? That certain things will work with certain groups. And so therefore, we can't be a monolith. This is not like one program going to solve our issue, right? It's
Correct.
Right? So that's something that I struggle with as a bishop, because the tendency is always to say, this is the answer. Well, no, it's not. This is not. Many of these will be the answer, right?
That's the key thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So now, when I was pastor at St. Dominic's in Brooklyn 1,000 years ago when I was young, Ash Wednesday was the day everybody came to church. Everybody came to church. And we used to joke about it, right? My mother, who was a saint, my mother used to call them AMP Catholics, which is terrible, right? Ashes and palms. If you give something away, they come, which is not, I mean, that's, God bless mom. But the truth is, there's something very deeply spiritual about ashes that I think lots of young adults may come who ordinarily would not come to Mass every Sunday like we're describing. Okay, so in your experience, talk about Ash Wednesday a bit, talk about its significance religiously, and talk about what would you suggest for our listeners who are some pastoral ministers and clergy. How could they use Ash Wednesday as an opportunity to perhaps engage young adults who are literally with them in church? Why don't you break that open for us?
I'd be happy to. Again, I go back. I start with the numbers. The one thing that I get very excited about is that 15% that you're going to see on Sunday, which is not very much, rises to about almost 40 or 50% on Ash Wednesday. It rises even further when you ask those same people, are you going to give up anything for Lent, or are you going to fast on Fridays from meat? That number jumps up to 60%. So anywhere between 40, 50, 60% of people who claim Catholicism but may not necessarily be as engaged with the faith are going to be somehow connected on Ash Wednesday. So those anecdotes about the people you'll see, it's true across the country. This is a major moment of return for people, but that's just it. It's a moment. These are, these momentary experiences. I think for many young people, and actually people for really of any age, what Ash Wednesday, I think one of the best ways to think about it is like those I voted stickers that you see on election day. When you get an I voted sticker after you vote, there's two things you feel. You feel a sense of accomplishment, that, I did my civic duty. And then you feel like you belong to there's a sense of you're in the group, you're in the club, you're one of the voting Americans, and you feel kind of a sense of belonging to that civic Americana type of feeling when you vote. And then the third aspect of it is when you put that I voted sticker and you walk around on election day, it's a great reminder to everybody else, like, oh yeah, before I leave work, I totally got to do that. I got to remember, or during my lunch break, I got to remember to do that. Or if you're at school, or if you're wherever you're at, that I voted sticker has a great marketing value to it as well. I think ashes somewhat fall in the same category. They give you a sense of, there is that sense of accomplishment, that sense that, I was able to do this. This was it's a moderate commitment. I don't do a lot maybe for my faith regularly, but this is something that I feel like I could do. It was a sense of accomplishment. There's also a feeling of belonging. I finally feel like I belong to some group, the Ash group, whether that's fellow Christians or Catholics. The nice thing, interesting thing about it is that Ash Wednesday is not even a Catholic thing. It's actually it's many mainline denominations of Christianity. So there's a certain sense of belonging to that larger sense of, and we would say as people of faith, that sign of literally of the cross, that's a sign that you belong to Christ, whose cross you wear on your forehead, or whatever shape it might be. And then it does somewhat draw people in when people see other people's ashes, or in the social media world, when we see the posts online of somebody showing off their ash, or posting about that they're going to get ashes or they have received ashes. It's a great sense of reminder, and I should do that, because I think for many, one of the misconceptions I think we have about young people, and you and I have talked about this, is that young people are, like you said, they're very diverse. And one of the things that's very diverse about them is many of them are struggling with a variety of different things. Mm-hmm. Lent is a time that allows them to slow down and kind of recalibrate, renew themselves, rest a little bit, and kind of get rejuvenated. So there is that attraction, I think, for a generation that somewhat feels, and increasingly more other generations that feel somewhat overwhelmed by life. And so I think that's part of the story of that. It's backed up by the numbers, because there are people who will come who normally wouldn't. And I think a lot of it is really related to, there's something special about that time of year. Maybe it's because, especially in northern climates, it's colder, so there's more introspection. It might be the New Year's resolution, like, let's try it again, maybe this time in February or March, and let's do it better. So there's a variety of reasons why. So that kind of gives you just a little thought about that time for many of the young people, and many people in general.
Those are great insights, Paul. I remember when I was a pastor, we had a few days before Ash Wednesday, I had a little staff meeting. And we got into this huge discussion about whether or not we would impart ashes to infants. And I felt very strongly that the answer to that is yes. And the reason is because it is such a primordial experience.
Yeah.
Right? Who are we, where are we going, and how are we getting there are the three questions that animate every human heart. And wherever we're going ultimately is going to go through the mystery of death. And the reason I mention it now in our conversation is because most of the young adults who were the parents who brought up their infants were deeply moved by the ashes that were sprinkled on the crown of their head, right? Mm-hmm. As alla Romana, which is done in Rome. That's how ashes are imparted in Rome. They're not imparted on the forehead. They are sprinkled on the crown of your head. Mm-hmm. And because it got them to think how much they love this child, how much this child is bone of their bone, flesh of their flesh, how they lay down their life to make sure this child, and yet there's a mystery beyond their ability to control for this child, but the Lord can. The Lord claims this child. And these are young adults, because again, one of the subgroups are the young married couples in our church who are trying to be parents in this world that makes it ever more difficult to do that. So, yeah, it makes perfect sense to me what you had said before. It's a reset button. And what animates my reflection and my prayer in Lent is that Lent invites us to get rid of the superficial. You get right to the heart of the matter, right? So
yeah, it's very basic.
Yeah, it's very basic. And I think, to your point, and perhaps you would disagree with this, so let me just say it, and then, please, correct me. But not only is life overwhelming, but there's a lot of superficiality because there's so much of it. There's so much information. There's so much data. There's so much stimuli. There's so much of everything that you can't tell the trees from the forest a lot of times. You're struggling just to keep up. So it kind of like says, set all that aside and let's get to the base of things. There's something really attractive to that, I think. Would you agree?
I think that there's a desire in Lent. One of the things we do in Lent is we get down to our basics too. I mean, I love the fact that many of our churches literally are stripped bare. We don't have much ornamentation in Lent, and there's a great symbolicness to that, to the fact that there's no extra frills here, and that kind of represents this return to the simplicity. And then even in Lent, we seem to draw our attention closer to Jesus, to the story of Jesus of Nazareth, his experience in the desert, his experience with the disciples, his experience crying before the tomb of Lazarus, very human moments of Jesus that we read during Lent. We follow the life of Christ. We get down to the basics of our faith, which is Jesus Christ. And I think that there's an attractability to that kind of, again, we strip away not saying that all the other parts of our church are bad or anything, but just that sometimes bringing it down to what is the core principle? Our core principle is following this person of Jesus who also suffered, who also struggled. And I think that there's that basic, and ashes themselves are they're very basic thing. They're the dirt, that we walk on. It's very primal. I mean, we've been doing these rituals since before the Christianity. I mean, this is something that they did in Egypt and in Jerusalem, and I guess in the Iliad, I think if you read it, Achilles pours ash on his forehead when he's mourning the death of his friend who died in the Trojan War. So it goes back so far because of that notion of getting back to these kind of the basic elemental things.
Right. And of course, the origin of the ashes we use is quite powerful, right? They are the burnt remains of palms that were blessed the year before. And I often remind young people in particular that it was the privilege of Caesar and his delegate to be received by having palms and branches laid in the street so that the soles of their feet did not touch the ground. It was a sign of royal privilege. It was the sign of earthly authority. And Jesus was accorded that coming into Jerusalem because they had the mistaken idea this was the new king to liberate, and then they realized that the kingship he offered was nothing of the sort. So we burn those palms to remind people what it is. What is the gateway to real glory? And I think when you put that starkly in front of young people, particularly young adults, who are entering into the world and they realize its shortcomings, something in their heart says, this can't be all. The promises we are being given can't be my ultimate happiness. And I think to your point, it's so primordial. Ashes says it without saying it. It just is there, right? It's a tremendous gift. Now, of course, we're going to go on break in just a few minutes. When we come back, I want you to talk to us about COVID-19 and ashes, because this Ash Wednesday is going to be different from Ash Wednesdays in the past. And how do we manage that, and how do we perhaps even use it as an opportunity to engage young adults in a new way? So while we have our break, why don't you give that some thought, and then when we come back, we could start with that. How's that sound, Paul?
Sounds fantastic.
Great. Yeah. So you're listening to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. Bishop Caggiano has a special guest, Paul Jarzembowski, with the Youth and Young Adult Ministries at the USCCB. We will be right back. Catholic radio works, and now we have it here in Connecticut and New York. It's been seen around the country that there's no better tool for evangelization. Where there's Catholic radio, the folks who listen deepen their faith. Families are strengthened, parishes and communities flourish. So, let people know you're listening to Veritas. Tell your friends to tune in, and let's make an impact here for Jesus and His Church. This is Steve Lee for Veritas Catholic Network. All right, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank with Bishop Frank Caggiano. On today's show, we've got a special guest, Paul Jarzembowski, with Youth and Young Adult Ministries at the USCCB. He's here speaking with the bishop about young people, and we're about to talk about Ash Wednesday.
Yes, and the real question is how this year with COVID-19, with the coronavirus pandemic, is how it is going to slightly change the practice of what we normally do. So Paul, allow me just to contextualize it. Here in the Diocese of Bridgeport, we met to discuss how we can impart ashes to people. And of course, if you were to impart ashes literally on a person's forehead and follow on with the next person's forehead, like we normally would do, all right, there is a risk of cross-transmission, right, of the virus. So we can't do that. So we are going to use an intermediary to impart ashes. And just like I do when I confirm, I use a cotton ball that's sterile for individual use. Most of the pastors of the diocese are going to be using either a cotton ball or a Q-tip to be placed into ashes and ash a person's, so that there's no cross-contamination. So I think the symbolism is still very powerfully there, but there's that safety piece to make sure that people remain safe, right? Because we want them to come. So talk about young adults, COVID-19, and Ash Wednesday. How does that change the equation, Paul, in any way? What do you think?
Well, one thing is that ashes have been with us since before Jesus. So ashes, the notion of covering yourself with ashes, signing yourself, having the ashes imposed is something that it survived plagues and wars and reformations and past pandemics. So I think that there will still be a desire to reconnect at ashes. I think there will be. So I think that we will still see a number of people come. Now, of course, because of this reality we're living in this unprecedented time of being away from our communities for so long, they'll probably alter it a little. But I still think there'll be a desire because, again, this is this time of year, this winter time when, we draw a little inward. There's going to, people are going to be saying, I need to do something different, or looking forward past the pandemic. What am I going to do? And Lent, in a way, is going to be a great, it's like spring training in a way. Lent will be, it's like, what am I going to do for when I get out, when we finally move into this new normal, as they would say, past the pandemic, and to kind of start shedding ourselves of what has been holding us back during this. So, I'm sure, just as many Lents do, this will be a time for great weight loss, because I'm sure some of us have been a little more sedentary or haven't gotten out as much because of this. So there might be a desire to perhaps lose weight, like in most Lents. But I think there might be a looking forward. This will be, I think, a Lent that looks with an eye towards that. But I think people will come. So that's one thing. Yeah.
I would agree. And I also think it's going to alter a bit of our liturgical practice, because if we were to only give out ashes during either the celebration of the Word or the celebration of Mass, we would severely limit the amount of people who can receive ashes, since our capacities are so restricted. So, so many of our churches will allow the imparting of ash simply as a ritual act outside of any celebration, and give the celebration to the person to be able to take home, or maybe with their family, pray it, so that we can give it, so people can experience that moment of encounter, right? Which it really is a moment of encounter. One of the things I think I would like to pick your brain about is, how do we invite young adults in particular, or young people too, for that matter, to connect the needs that have been generated by the pandemic, and ask them to address those needs as their Lenten penance. So in other words, the homeless, the hungry, those who are isolated, those who need to be shopped for food, or as young adults to be able to volunteer in these shelters where people in growing numbers are going. Would you recommend that we, give that sort of guidance to say to our young adults who are able-bodied? They're not, many of them are not in the category of being, medically challenged, so that they cannot go out into the world with precaution. Can we say to them, Lent, yeah, we could lose weight. We all could do that. I certainly could do that. But the point is, there's real need in charity. Would you sacrifice your time to, peel away some of the effects of this terrible pandemic? What do you think about something like that?
I think it's fantastic. One of the things that we see is that because the numbers are so high for people who like to fast and give up things or do good, positive things for Lent. Like that's something that many young people get behind. In fact, we even see it's interesting in the statistical look at it. That actually, young people actually end up sometimes giving up things at a higher rate than those who are older than them. Like young people love the challenge almost of being able to do something to better the world, to make a difference, and Lent gives them tools. I think this would be a great, if on Ash Wednesday, perhaps one suggestion is that whether it's at a service, whether it's at a mass, whether it's in the parking lot, however the ashes are being distributed in a community, there is, of course, the rite and ritual of the imposition. But if possible, maybe take one extra moment to either make sure that every young adult gets like a piece of paper that gives them some opportunities, what they could do with your community during Lent. Like, here's some things if you want to, especially those social engagement projects like you mentioned, engaging with the poor. So perhaps even making sure they get something. So not only do they get the ashes, but maybe they get a piece of paper that says to them, or, maybe if you do have a way with like parish, like if you're registering for your seat at your church, you might get their email or their name in your parish database as they're registering for a mass. Make sure you follow up with them during Lent and say, with an email or a message of some sort, and say, during Lent, if you'd like to help, if you'd like to do this, here are some opportunities to challenge yourself. I think that we can't let that opportunity pass by, because many young people will be giving us a moment on Ash Wednesday, even if they don't come that often, and they do drive by or come by or register for a mass or a service on Ash Wednesday. They're giving us a moment. So can we take that moment and stretch it just a little bit more and say, we'd like to invite you. Again, not with obviously whether it's this year or any year, I think it's important that we never make the young adult or the person, the visitor, the newcomer, ever feel like, no sense reminding them of something they know already. I don't go that often, so no need to kind of keep harping it a little bit. But certainly greet them with a sense of welcome and say, it's great to see you. I'd like to give you an opportunity to help us out with your gifts. And I think the things that you mentioned there during this pandemic, how can we aid others in the community? And young adults are ready to do that. They're up for the challenge. And it's the limited commitment of Lent, the 40-day challenge, in a way, fits very in with the rest of popular culture in some respects. You have 60 days to this, or 3 weeks to this, or 5 weeks to that. You've got a couple of these multi-day or multi-week challenges that are popular in culture, no matter what. Meatless Mondays is not even a religious thing. It's a pop culture thing that has really taken off for people to be aware of their eating habits on Mondays, and to go vegan, or to be vegetarian on Mondays, meatless Mondays. So the fact that they would do this kind of challenge for Lent and put it to good work, not just losing weight, but to do something. I think young people especially will be ready for that, and I think that's an opportunity we can give them.
Absolutely. One of the things that I am imagining with the pastors of the diocese here is what I call an ambassador ministry. 2 Corinthians 5, Paul speaks of us as ambassadors of Christ. Mm-hmm. And that really is invitational ministry, that when our restrictions begin to lessen, who is going to go out and perhaps go to the diner and meet a few people and talk about engagement with the church, or pick up a phone and say, we miss you, you're not around, is there anything we could do for you? I have always believed that young adults have the passion and the energy to do that, and if we invite them and walk with them, they will invite others to do the same journey. And so what I'm really saying is, I think engaging young adults personally, right, and in a very sustained accompaniment. Remember, we were in the Synod of Youth together. Paul and I were at the Synod of Youth together in Rome. Then they will, in time, do it for others. And that's the recipe for the renewal of the church in the end. What are your thoughts about something like that, Paul?
Well, I think it's wonderful that on Ash Wednesday, the reading you just mentioned is the second reading every year. Mm-hmm. Paul calls us to put on it, to be ambassadors for Christ. I think the other thing that I would nuance it a little bit, or add a component to what you're recommending.
Please.
I think it's important also, as we are ambassadors, that we're not just ambassadoring just to get them to come to church. I think that's certainly something we do want to see them come back to church, but part of it is just to simply find out what's going on in their lives. Mm-hmm. Because if they see that you're coming and in being an ambassador, it's very similar to like a Jehovah's Witness standing at your door and saying, why aren't you, aren't you saved? So I think it's more than, I I think the first thing to do is just to sit there and say, tell me your story. What's going on in your life? Where, what is it? And in the course of learning their story, we will start to learn what holds them back from a community, of feeling like they belong somewhere. Because again, like we started, the many young adults' reasons for not coming to church is not often for religious reasons. It's simply that they never felt a sense of belonging. They never felt like anyone cared about their lives. So I think one of the best things we can do as ambassadors is just simply to hear their story. What is it they're struggling with? And ask them, what do you do to help with that? Like, where do you go? Whatever their issue, if it's a health issue, if it's a work issue, if it's an emotional, a mental health issue, what is that? What are the things that they're wrestling with in life right now? And I think Lent is a great opportunity, because Lent can be, for the next 40 days after Ash Wednesday, they're going to have Lent gives us a chance to kind of renew and to kind of reshape and rethink about what's holding us back and what's giving us a hard time, and laying those cares on the Lord. Lent is a great time to do that. So I think that would be the other aspect, is just learning their story. And again, not just their faith story, their life story. And then as a person of faith, through that relationship, through that accompaniment, then find opportunities to invite them to, first of all, to connect with you. They belong now, like they would feel a sense of belonging from you as an ambassador, and then you can slowly introduce them to other people where they can also feel a sense of belonging, that someone cares about them.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a great point. So let me ask you, your new book, Hope from the Ashes, is it about what we're talking about today? Is it born out of the Ash Wednesday experience?
It is.
So
Ash Wednesday for me. Oh, well, let me tell you, the Ash Wednesday for me is, and bless me, Father, for this is going to sound a little weird, but Ash Wednesday is one of the happiest days of my year. I am so excited on Ash Wednesday. It's the most odd day to feel excited, because it's often a day where we draw inward and we think in those withdrawn type of emotions. But for me, I get so excited because all of these people who we don't normally see have given us a moment of their time. So my book is really just, first of all, to help people become aware of who's there, who are the people that are coming, why are they there. I think sometimes we don't even pay attention to the phenomena. I mean, we know that there's a lot of people there, but do we really stop and think about what their story is? So the book is going to help us kind of look through some practical suggestions as to what you can do before Lent, during Lent, or during Ash Wednesday and Lent, and then what can we do beyond that? What can we do to keep that Lenten spirit going? I know it sounds weird to keep Lenten spirit going beyond Lent, because we often think, we shed Lent and we move to Easter, but there's something really special that the church does well in Lent that I would like to keep us going on throughout the rest of the year. So my book will kind of give some practical suggestions to parishes, to Catholic leaders, as to what they can do. Because everyone can do it, whether they're a parent, whether they are a fellow young adult, whether they are working for the church, they're on their parish council, or maybe they just go to church. They're one of the 15% perhaps, or the 20% who go on a regular basis, and they always have been. And they simply they love Jesus, they love the community of the church, and they want to know why others may not feel as connected. And so this would be for them, and some ideas as to what they can do. And it could boil down to, I'll give one little bit away. One of the easiest things we can do, and it might be a little challenging this Ash Wednesday because of our face masks, although I think you can still do it, is to simply look, like to not turn your glare away from people you don't know on Ash Wednesday. If you are in the pew and you see somebody you don't know, smile at them. Make them if you can, again, we're within some guidelines this year, but if there is the possibility, just simply introducing oneself on Ash Wednesday, say it's great to see you, and through that mask, people can see you're smiling. Because I think a lot of times people who aren't familiar with our customs will go thinking that everyone's looking at them with suspicion and anger and distrust. And so they're they walk in there kind of knowing they're in territory they're not familiar with. So to make them feel at ease, that's just like a very simple thing that any Catholic, whether you're the music director, or whether or not you just simply are a parishioner who just loves the Lord and loves to come to church. So either way, and no matter what your connection is, you can still make a big deal that day. So that's what the book's going to kind of give some ideas as to what to do.
That's great. And it'll be available before next Ash Wednesday, right? You think?
We're going to see. Depends how fast I write this year.
Get cracking. Come on, we need this book.
In the meantime, I can be with you here to talk about it. But yeah, next year hopefully it'll be out. So
may I just draw a personal vignette from what you just said? Being a diocesan bishop, I have had the great privilege of being invited into many people's homes before the pandemic. And, I being somewhat of an introvert, which is hard to believe, for many people find it hard to believe, but I am by personality an introvert. So to be invited into someone's home, I always go with apprehension because, I'm not exactly sure what reception I'm going to get. I'm not exactly sure what they presume in their head I'm going to be asking. I'm not even sure what the setup is. And it's the hospitality. It's just what you say. It's the little things that immediately can put you at ease, put me at ease, when it's a genuine welcome, regardless of what comes after. So if a person's been away from church, it's the same dynamic, isn't it?
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're afraid.
Right.
They're just as afraid of us as we are. I guess there is oftentimes we're suspicious, or maybe we even get a little upset because they took our favorite parking spot or pew. But if we can put them at ease, man, that will go a long way because they're already feeling a little weird.
Absolutely. All right. So now, before we end our conversation, which has been tremendous, right? I just want you to ask one question for the sake of our listeners who have all the terminology, but don't quite understand what it means, and I am among those sometimes because I get confused. But we talk about Gen X, Gen Z, millennials. Well, could you just give us like the 1 minute schema? What are all those categories referred to?
Sure. There's like 15, 20-year blocks of time that we've divided people into. They're a little artificial, but basically, if you hear Gen X or baby boomers, those are your over 40 group. So baby boomers and Gen X are over 40. Millennials are in their 20s and 30s, and then the Gen Z are people who are in their lower 20s, in college, even in high school. So and then below them, the children of today are called the alphas. And so they keep just naming different generations because what happens is, as we grow, there's little elements of life that change for us that make us just a little bit different than the people who came before us. So that's really all those generations are. They're constructs to just describe how things are changing and that this generation's got these norms and these trends. So that's all that is.
Got it.
Hey, Paul, I have a question. So as you're talking about those different generations, do we need to approach them differently? Do we need to approach millennials differently than Gen Z, differently than Alpha?
Yeah, I would say so. One of the things that we've seen, like I can give you an example. The millennials were often, you approach them in groups. You approach small groups. They didn't like large groups, but small groups. The Gen Z, the ones in college and even younger, are much more individualized. And so approaching them one by one is a lot more. Now, it does mean a lot more work because we have to do a lot more very specific outreach that you may not have had done with millennials, and even before that with boomers or Gen Xers. So that is something that is different in the way you would approach, for instance, a college student or a high school student is very one-on-one oftentimes. Now, again, there's always exceptions to every rule, so I just want to put that caveat on there. But by and large, the Gen Zers are that personalized, individualized accompaniment is much more of a thing, whereas perhaps in an older group, you may be able to greet them in a group of 3 or 4. and maybe even older, you could do a whole, you could make, like, for instance, if you make a pulpit announcement to all of these people, baby boomers, they get that. They're like, yep, oh, they just said all people who are married. Okay, that means me. Whereas if you do that generalized announcement, a millennial will definitely not feel that, and the Gen Z for sure will not feel that connection or be that invitation. So we have to do a lot more individualized invitations for especially younger groups. Whether that will change over time, we don't know, but that is one thing we've noticed.
Makes sense. Okay, let's take one more break. You're listening to Let Me Be Frank, and Bishop Frank Caggiano is speaking with Paul Jarzembowski, who runs youth and young adult ministries at the USCCB. We're going to take a break and answer a listener question when we come back.
Why do we need Catholic radio? Because not everybody's sitting in front of a computer or watching their television set at home. How about when driving to work? How about while at work at your desk? Catholic radio's there for you. I may be a Catholic priest, but I'm still a student of the faith. And Catholic radio helps supply good material, whether it be a question and answer format show, whether it be a show itself on doctrine or theology. I myself, as a priest, am always learning.
Welcome back to Let Me Be Frank with Bishop Frank Caggiano. His Excellency has been speaking today with Paul Jarzembowski with Youth and Young Adult Ministries at the USCCB. It's the time of the show, Excellency, where we answer a listener question. And we got one in that actually fits right in with the whole subject of today's show. So here it is. Jesus said, when praying, we should go to an inner room where nobody can see us. And when fasting, we should carry ourselves normally and not look like we are suffering. Does that mean we should keep our ashes to ourselves and not post ash tags or selfies with ashes? Should we be more private about Ash Wednesday?
Right. That's, first of all, whoever came up with the question is extremely insightful, because there is, in the very liturgy itself, the reading from the gospel that says exactly that. So we're making a public display when the Lord is telling us to be much more introspective. So, I mean, that's extraordinarily insightful. Having said that, I think the key, the hermeneutic to figure out what is being done is the connection between the exterior and the interior. That is, the Lord is not criticizing exterior observance for its own sake, but because it is disconnected from the inner room. So it's hypocritical. And that is what he's objecting to. But in fact, if we receive ashes, just like Paul has said so beautifully in this podcast, as a moment of this primordial invitation to go deep within ourselves, to discover the truth of who we are before the Lord, who then saves us. If we have done that, then the exterior display of ashes is not hypocritical. It's a statement of who I am. It's no different than when I look into your face, Steve, right here today. I am seeing Steve, right? The ashes on your forehead is seeing Steve, if Steve is truly in touch with what they mean. And I will know right away if you do or don't, right? That's the great mystery of an integrity of life. So the answer to the question is dependent on the person who is actually the motivation of the person. And if you're prancing around kind of like, isn't this fun? And with no moment of introspection or going, then of course I would think, yeah, you have to avoid that at all costs. But if you have done what the Lord asks, don't be afraid to show it, because quite frankly, if you go into the inner room, develop this relationship with the Lord, you will act a certain way that you're not going to hide. The ashes are no different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense. Yep, exactly.
Right.
I might also, specifically to the second part of that question regarding the social media engagement, and again, one has to just be very discerning how one engages on social media with that. If it's meant to again show off that you've done something and you're somehow holier than anyone else because you got it, then yeah, that's certainly something we want to avoid. But if you're doing it because there's a sense of wanting to be part of again, that notion of belonging, the notion of feeling like you now have a family that you'd like to share that family. I mean, when it's the same thing like when you gather with your family at Christmas or at the holidays or any other time of year, you sometimes post that online because you're just so overjoyed to be part of that family. And you'd like to share that. If that's the motivation to be, that you belong something, that can have great impact, and especially impact on people who, it's a reminder to someone maybe who's scrolling through their social media feed and going, oh yeah, it's Ash Wednesday. And that might motivate them. That might encourage them to grow themselves. So in a way, there's a sense of evangelization that takes place. Again, doing it to kind of remind, to help others know where you feel a sense of belonging. Maybe that's just the way you might hashtag quote unquote this year would be, inviting people to say, this is where I feel like I belong. I feel special. I feel loved in this community. And I hope you find it too. So, that might be a way you could post on social media about it without making it feel like you're showing off.
That's a great point. May I just have one public service announcement? Okay. When we talk about social media and posting, all of our listeners, please do not post a picture of your vaccine card, because there's great celebration. Many people feel a great jubilation that they were vaccinated, and they put it online. But there is enough information on that card for your identity to be stolen with your birth date and your name, your full name. So I think people should be very prudent not to do that, because they will open themselves up to possibly tremendous harm. Again, it's all about discerning.
Yes.
Right? Discerning.
Very good. Very good. If you have questions for Bishop Frank, you can send them in to questions@veritascatholic.com. Bishop Frank Caggiano is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So is Veritas Catholic Network. Paul, it was so great having you on with us today. Where can people go to find out more about the USCCB Office of Youth and Young Adult Ministry?
Well, they can go to usccb.org, and then they can just, in the search there, just look for youth, look for young adults, look for World Youth Day. So all they do is go to usccb.org and search for that. And then on social media, the USCCB's Facebook and Twitter and Instagram is also great ways to connect and find out a lot of great things about what we're doing.
Great.
Great. It was great to be with you, Paul.
It's always wonderful to be with you, Bishop Frank. I thank you for all that you do to engage these audiences as well. So thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Excellency, would you please give us your blessing?
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, you invite us into the mystery of the ashes of our sinfulness, the ashes of our mortal life, as a hopeful reminder of the offer of salvation that comes in the death and resurrection of your Son. May this Lent be a time of renewal, rest, prayer, and peace to our hearts as we seek to do your holy will. And may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit come upon you and remain with you forever. Amen.
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 We'll be back on Ash Wednesday next week.
Great.
Okay.
All the best to you, Paul. God bless.
Thank you.